السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة المتقين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. Welcome to a new series in regards to the Fiqh of Ramadan, the Fiqh of fasting, where we will talk about the legal rulings of fasting. Inshallah, how we'll conduct the courses or the series is that we'll speak about the legal rulings, and this will cover the do's and the don'ts of fasting, and then after we've concluded this series, we'll come on to the spiritual dimensions of fasting and talk about the practical advices and tips in regards to having a productive Ramadan. A few points before starting that are worth noting. Number one, that the aim of this series isn't to have an in-depth discussion of fasting. Far from it. Rather, we just want to give an overview of its rulings so that someone that is not familiar with the rules of fasting, they can watch these videos quickly, understand them in a quick and easy manner. And we want to keep them relatively short, the videos. We don't have an in-depth discussion of different opinions, varying different sayings of different scholars and so forth. The other is that we are only focusing on the Hanafi school of fiqh. Okay, so there are different legal schools of thought. We'll be only focused on the Hanafi school of thought. We want to keep it very simple and straightforward, so we're not going to dwell into what other schools of thought say. The other is that we're focusing loosely on the text of Nurul Idah, which is a text that's first studied by students who study the legal rulings of worship. It's a good book by Abu Hassan al-Shurumbalali, but we'll be loosely following it. When I say loosely, it's because there'll be certain chapters I'll overlook, and certain chapters I'll paraphrase in my own words rather than translate them literally. And one last point I want to mention before continuing and before starting is the nature of fasting is such that we have to stay away from certain rules, and we have to speak about certain rules. So one of the things that a person needs to stay away from is sexual gratification. So because of the nature of it, there will be elements during this series which will not be suitable for a younger audience. So it's probably best for parents, guardians, whoever, to listen themselves and then decide for yourself as to what is appropriate and what is not. And the thing is that one could ask as to why I'm not paraphrasing the words in a way which some adults will understand. Well, it's not a good idea. When it comes to legal rulings, it's not a good idea, in my humble opinion anyway, to paraphrase things, because you leave an element of doubt of what you're trying to say. And that has ramifications, especially with fasting. I'll give you an example. Imagine I say something, some of you understand what I'm saying and some people don't. What will then happen is, if a rule is violated, potentially speaking, by breaking the fast, you are now going to be you now have the repercussion of having to fast for 60 consecutive days. So it's not a small thing. And if you, in that consecutive fast, if you miss one fast, then you have to start again the whole 60. So they're not small matters to play around with. Hence why being direct and is sometimes or many times a lot better. Anyway, let's start with the text. The Imam starts by mentioning the definition of fasting. He says, "Wal imsaku naharon," that it is to abstain throughout the day from a few things. So, abstaining from a few things throughout the day. What is it meant by day? So, by day we mean the fasting day, which is the beginning of Fajr time, what we call true dawn, the beginning of the Fajr prayer time up to sunset. So, alhamdulillah, we're quite lucky where most mosques, most masajid would have printed a timetable of prayers during Ramadan especially. So all you need to look at is what is the beginning of the Fajr prayer time. We're not concerned with, and it doesn't really matter as to what time your local mosque prays their Fajr prayer, but it's about the prayer beginning time. That's the time that we need to start our fast, okay, up to sunset. So when I say day, in context of this series and in context of the class of fasting, that day refers to the fasting day. So throughout that day we want to stay away from two things that the Imam says. He brings up to 2 points. Number one, عن إدخال شيء عن إدخال شيء عمدا أو خطأ بطن أو ما له حكم الباطن. to abstain from the entering of anything, intentional or accidental, into the stomach, or something which has the same legal status of the stomach. It's quite a long sentence, but I'll break this down bit by bit. So he says that throughout the day we want to abstain from anything entering the body, anything entering the body through one of the cavities. So the cavities refers to the private parts, the back passage, the mouth, the nose, the ears. So these are all cavities, or we'll speak about if you have a wound, if that's considered a cavity or not. We'll speak about that later on. But through any of the cavities of the body, anything entering, because it doesn't have to be food and drink. It could be medication. It could be certain oils or creams or whatever it may be. So it's more than just food and drink that enters the body. Amdan or khata'an. Amdan either on purpose or by mistake. A mistake, for example, would be, imagine somebody's praying dhuhr salah. And he has to do wudu. So a person is doing wudu, and we know the sunnah is to rinse the mouth. Put water in the mouth, rinse it. Gargling the mouth is the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Now, whilst a person's fasting, you shouldn't gargle. That's the rule. But this person decides to. He is conscious of the fact that he's fasting, and yet he decides to gargle, and by accident that water slips down the throat. Well, that's what we mean by mistake. Now, the Imam here who's written the book, he's quite specific on using the words intentional or by accident. He misses out the word nasiyan, meaning by forgetfulness, because forgetfulness has its own rulings. أو ما له حكم الباطن, or he either goes into the stomach or leads towards the stomach, or has the same legal ruling. So the brain, is in reference to the brain. The brain in the stomach, anything that goes to it or leads to it, if it enters through the cavity and leads to it, whether it's intentional or by accident, well, that's the thing that we want to stay away from throughout our fasting day. The second thing that we want to stay away from, وَعَنْ شَهْوَةِ الْفَرْجِ, and abstain from sexual gratification. We'll speak about the finer details of what is and what is not allowed in this context. Is kissing allowed, and how so forth, the do's and don'ts. So the Imam now goes on to the obligation of fasting. What are the causes for the fast becoming an obligation upon a person? So he says, سبب وجوب رمضان شهود جزء منه وكل يوم منه سبب لوجوب أدائه. That the thing that causes the obligation of fasting in the month of Ramadan is the being present in the time that it is correct to fast, and the arrival of each day of Ramadan is a reason of obligating one to fast. Basically, all that in essence means is, if you are present in Ramadan, in the month of Ramadan, you are witnessing the month of Ramadan, well then you have to fast. And every day as that occurs, then you have to fast the next day. So the night precedes the day in Islam. If you witness the night of Ramadan, well then the next day you have to fast. A similar example would be of prayers. If I was to say, ask question, well, I'm only responsible to pray the Dhuhr Salah when the Dhuhr Salah starts. If it's 5 o'clock in the morning, well then I don't have to pray, because the Dhuhr Salah time hasn't even started. That's the only point he's trying to put across. Along with that, he goes on to the next point, which is the rulings of fasting. Well, not rulings, rather it's conditions that render the fasting an obligation. He says, وَهُوَ فَرْضٌ أَدَاءً وَقَضَاءً عَلَى مَنِ اجْتَمَعَ فِي أَرْبَعَةِ أَشْيَاء. He says that it's an obligation upon someone to fast in the month of Ramadan. Ada wa Qadhan, the present Ramadan and the past Ramadan that one has missed, upon a person who meets 4 conditions. So let me explain this. Before we talk about the 4 conditions of a person, he says that fasting is an obligation fasting is an obligation upon a person for the present Ramadan if they meet 4 conditions, and of the past Ramadan if they have met 4 conditions. So what it means is, if they've met these 4 conditions in the past Ramadan but they didn't fast. So imagine last Ramadan you didn't fast, but you met these 4 conditions, well then you have to make up those fasts. And that's what he's trying to say. Now, what are the 4 conditions? Just for clarity's sake, there's only 3 conditions that actually apply to you. Okay, we only need to be mindful of the 3 conditions. There's a 4th one, but that no longer applies. Okay, I'll explain that. So the first 3 are being Muslim, al-Islam, being Muslim. So if you're a Muslim, that's part 1 ticked off the box. Wal-aql, you are sane. Well, if you are sane, you ticked off the box as well. You got 1 more left to consider. And if you meet that condition, now you have to fast. Wal-bulugh, you are mature. Maturity in Islam for a boy would be when he's had a wet dream. That point onwards, he's now considered a mature person. And for a girl, it would be someone that's started their menstrual cycle. If you've met these 3 conditions, you now have to fast. Okay, so a non-Muslim doesn't have to fast because he doesn't meet the condition. Someone who's insane doesn't have to fast because he doesn't meet the condition. Or someone who is a child, he's not reached maturity, well then he doesn't have to fast because he's not met the condition. You have to meet all 3 conditions, okay, of being Muslim, being sane and mature. The 4th condition that's normally written in fiqh books is having knowledge. So وَالْعِلْمُ بِالْوُجُوبِ لِمَنْ أَسْلَمَ بِدَارِ الْحَرْبِ أَوِ الْكَوْنِ بِدَارِ الْإِسْلَامِ. That to have knowledge of the obligation of Ramadan for a person who's accepted Islam or who is Muslim in Darul Harb, in non-Muslim lands, or in contrary to a person being in a Muslim land. So let me explain this. Basically, in past times, the lands, different countries were categorized into 2 states politically, or two situations, either a Muslim land or a non-Muslim land. In a non-Muslim land, because you're the only Muslim there, you don't have large Muslim community, you're the only Muslim there probably, and there's no masjids, no learning, no teaching allowed. So, a communist country, a strong communist country where there's no religion allowed and so forth, would be a better example. If somebody has no knowledge that Ramadan started or does not know the rules of fasting and so forth, well then for that person, knowledge of all of these things is an extra requirement, an extra condition. See, we don't live in those times no more. Even in non-Muslim lands, we have large Muslim communities, we have an abundant amount of scholars, we have the masajid, we have the we have the allowance of teaching and learning Islam. So it's a lot more complicated. This rule does not apply no more. The reason why I brought this up is because I wanted to highlight the fact that knowledge was only a condition under certain special circumstances. So for a person to say, look, I didn't know the rules of fasting, I didn't know Ramadan started, ignorance is not an excuse. That's the only reason why I've mentioned it. Continuing on, he says, وَيُشْتَرَطُ لِوُجُوبِ أَدَّائِهِ. So there are conditions for the validity of fasting. Okay, for a fast to be considered valid, there are certain conditions. Validity. It's obligation. There's a few other conditions that we need to look at. Not validity, it's the obligation. Wujub. So, as-sihhatu min marad wa hayd wa nifas wal iqama. So, the first thing we need to look at is a person is free from ill health. They are free from, they're not on the menstrual cycle at the moment, or they're not on the postnatal bleeding. And the second thing to consider is that a person is a resident. So let's speak about this in a bit more detail. Someone who is has ill health, we'll have to look into this further. Okay, it is possible they do not have to fast, depending on the nature of the illness. Someone who is on the menstrual cycle, but then you don't have to fast. Allah's forgiven that. You're still rewarded, inshallah. And we'll speak about this in a lot more detail in the spiritual dimensions of fasting later on, as to what a person can do who's on the menstrual cycle. Again, postnatal bleeding. These are allowances from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So see it as a mercy from Allah. As someone has postnatal bleeding, again, you don't have to fast. You actually, as a matter of you're not meant to be fasting whilst you're in these conditions of ill health, on the menstrual cycle and on postnatal bleeding. The other thing that a person needs to consider is that if you are a resident, what it means by a resident is you're not a traveller. A traveller in Hanafi fiqh, there's two opinions. If you're on a travel which is greater than 48 miles, according to some scholars. Some scholars say 51 miles. So whichever the opinion you take is fine. If you are traveling a greater distance than that, and along with that your destination of where you're traveling to, you're staying there for 14 days or less, well then you're considered a traveler. If you're staying there for 15 days or more, even though it may be 100 miles, well then you're not considered a traveler no more. Okay, you'll be considered a resident. So to be a resident is a condition for one to fast. If you're a traveler, then you don't have to fast. Okay. Now, these were all in relation to obligations of fasting, the conditions of fasting and so forth. Now we're coming on to the conditions that validate a fast. وَيُشْتَرَطُ لِصِحَّةِ أَدَاءِ ثَلَاثَةٍ. That the conditions that validate a fast are three. Number one, niyyah, intention. So we know the importance of intention is highlighted a lot inside Islam. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. All actions are called an intention. So for every worship you need to have an intention. Now we'll speak about intention in a bit more detail as to what that is later on. وَالْخَلُوُّ عَمَّا يُنَافِيهِ مِنْ حَيْضٍ وَنِفَاسٍ. That to be free from anything that is contrary to fasting, such as being on the menstrual cycle and postnatal bleeding. So anything contrary to a person fasting. So if someone is ill, well then you don't fast. So being free from all of these things. And number three, the third thing, وَالْخَلُوُّ عَمَّا يُفْسِدُهُ. To be free from anything that invalidates the fast, I mean that breaks the fast itself, such as eating and drinking or fulfilling in, to have intercourse basically. There are many other things that can break the fast, but there are some examples. So three things that a person needs to be considered of. Intention, to be free from anything that is contrary to fasting. This is reference to all the things that we've spoken about before, the conditions, and so forth of fasting. وَالْخَلُوُّ عَمَّا يُفْسِدُهُ. And to be free from anything that breaks the fast. Now, he also gives a footnote here, وَلَا يُشْتَرَطُ الْخَلُوُّ عَنِ الْجَنَابَةِ. That it is not a condition to be free from impurity or from janaba. Okay, what that basically means that if you're in a state of impurity doesn't mean you've got mud in your skin or something. What we call Islamic impurity. What we call Islamic impurity, but was Islam terms as impurity. So let me explain this. Impurity is in reference to someone having a wet dream maybe, or they've ejaculated, they've had intercourse. Now you are in a state where you must have a ritual bath, what we call the ghusl. Okay, you're in a state where you must have a ritual bath. That's what we mean by janaba here. Okay, impurity. If you are in that state, this is not a condition that you need to clean yourself from that in order to fast. He makes this clear because it is possible that throughout the night someone engages in sexual activity or has a wet dream whilst asleep, and they've not eaten anything and they've not even had a shower. So forget eating part. They've not had a shower, they've not had the ritual bath, the ghusl, and now the Fajr time is started. Well, that does not affect your fast at all, in the slightest. As a matter of fact, we have a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that he did this a few times as well. So there's there to give that clarification. The clarification is important. Okay. Now we come to the pillar of fasting. ركنه وركنه الكف عن قضاء شهوة البطن والفرج وما ألحق بهما. So the pillar of fasting is to basically stay away from the desires of the stomach and the private parts and anything that holds the same status. Okay, so basically you want to stay away from food, drink, and anything entering the body, anything that's related to sexual or any kind of intercourse, anything that goes towards it, we want to stay away from it. That's the pillar of fasting. وحكمه, its legal consequence, سقوط الواجب عن الذمة والثواب في الآخر, meaning what the aim and objective of fasting in of itself is to fulfill the obligation of fasting that's put upon us by Allah, and to attain reward in hereafter. And that's the aim of fasting. So we'll stop up till here inshallah. So for today has been the crux of today's lesson is basically the obligations of fasting, what validates a fast, what makes the fast an obligation upon a person. We spoke about all those conditions. From here onwards we'll speak about next week the different types of fastings, the intention and things like that inshallah. We'll leave it up till here. Jazakumullah khair. Pray to Allah that Allah grants ability to practice. Subhanallah bihamdi, subhanakallah wa bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.